I want to start by saying I'm not someone who believes in things I can't explain. I studied library science. I cataloged rare documents for 8 years at a university archive in Edinburgh before the budget cuts came and took my position with them. I believe in systems, in order, in the comfort of knowing that everything has a place, and that place can be found if you look carefully enough. That's why the job at Voss Memorial seemed perfect, and that's why what happened there still doesn't make sense to me. Not in any way I can file neatly away and close the drawer on. Voss Memorial was a psychiatric hospital in rural Ontario, about 90 minutes north of Toronto. It had operated from 1921 until 1987, when it was shut down following a government review of institutional care. The building itself, a 4-story red brick Victorian structure with 2 long wings extending from a central rotunda, had sat largely empty since then. In 2019, a Heritage Foundation acquired it. They had plans for conversion, boutique hotel, event space, the usual story you hear about these old places. Before any of that could happen, the records needed to be sorted. 66 years of patient files, administrative documents, pharmaceutical logs, staff rosters, correspondence. All of it boxed, stacked, and stored in the basement archival rooms since the closure. The foundation needed everything digitized, cross-referenced, and either preserved or legally destroyed before the renovation crews moved in. They advertised for a contract archivist. Night hours only, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Because the building's power had been partially restored on a limited grid, and the Heritage consultants worked days. They didn't want 2 teams in the building simultaneously disturbing materials. The pay was exceptional. The contract was 12 weeks. I was 34, newly single, and had been freelancing for 2 years on jobs that barely covered rent. I applied the same afternoon I saw the listing. My name is Daniel Marsh, and I worked 17 nights at Voss Memorial before I walked out and never went back. I'll describe the building the way I came to know it, because the layout matters. You entered through the main front doors into a reception hall. Marble floors, vaulted ceiling, the kind of grand entrance that was meant to project authority and calm to families delivering relatives they didn't know what to do with. A wide staircase rose from the center of the reception hall to the upper floors. To the left was the East Wing, administrative offices, staff rooms, the superintendent's suite. To the right, the West Wing, patient wards, treatment rooms, what the old records called the therapeutic suites, which I later learned was the hospital's term for the electroconvulsive therapy rooms and the isolation block. The basement was accessed through a door behind the main staircase. Stone steps, no railing, leading down to a long corridor that ran the length of the building. The archival rooms were at the far end, 3 connected spaces that had originally served as record storage and a pharmacy overflow. The foundation had installed basic shelving, a folding work table, a laptop on a tripod stand, and a flatbed scanner. That was my office for 12 weeks. There was no mobile signal inside the building. There was a landline, a single telephone mounted on the wall outside the archive rooms, connected to the foundation's answering service, which was staffed until midnight and then went to voicemail. If I needed anything after midnight, I was to call the emergency number for the security company, whose nearest patrol vehicle was 40 minutes away. The nearest town was a 20-minute drive on a road that, in November, could ice over without warning. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was just old documents in a quiet building. I told myself a lot of things in those first few days. The first night I noticed something was off was night 4. I'd settled into the rhythm of the work by then. I'd arrive at 9, park in the staff lot at the side of the building, let myself in with my key card, make my way through the reception hall and down the basement stairs. The building was cold. The heating system was minimal, just enough to prevent pipe damage, and the basement was colder still. I wore thermal layers under my work clothes, kept a flask of tea on the table, and worked by the light of a high-powered desk lamp that made a small warm island in the stone-walled dark. On night 4, I was processing patient files from 1943, administrative forms, admission records, correspondence between the superintendent and patient families. The kind of paperwork that is mundane and deeply sad in equal measure. You see the bureaucratic language wrapped around human suffering, and you understand, in a way that no history book quite captures, what those places were. I was perhaps 2 hours into the shift when I smelled it. Roses, not the faint ghost of something, a strong, distinct floral scent, like fresh-cut roses in an enclosed room. Here, in a stone basement that smelled of damp paper, old dust, and cold concrete. I sat very still. I lifted my head and breathed slowly. It was unmistakable. And then, after perhaps 30 seconds, it was gone, replaced immediately by the usual smell of the archive, as if a door had been briefly opened and closed. I looked around the room. I was alone. Both connecting doors to the adjacent archive spaces were closed, as I always kept them. The corridor door was closed and locked from the inside. I developed the habit on night 2 without quite consciously deciding to. I told myself it was something in the old documents. Paper degrades in complex ways. Old ink, old adhesives. Some papers had clearly been stored with other materials. Dried flowers pressed between letters, that sort of thing. It was a reasonable explanation. I wrote floral odor, possibly document preservation material, in my work log and kept going. Then, at approximately 1:15 in the morning, I heard the footsteps. They came from directly above me. The ground floor reception hall. Slow, measured, the clear sound of someone walking across marble. One step. Pause. Another step. Pause. I stood up from my table. I stood very still with my tea flask halfway to my mouth and listened. The foundation had given me contact details for the heritage consultants and confirmed that no one else would be in the building during my shifts. The security company did external patrols. They did not enter the building unless called. I had not called them. The footsteps crossed the reception hall in maybe 40 seconds. They stopped. Then they started again, but this time they were moving toward the staircase, toward the basement stairs. I reached the corridor door in 3 steps and pressed my ear against it. I could hear the stone staircase clearly from there. Sound carried well in that basement. I heard nothing on the stairs. I waited 4 minutes, counted every second, heard nothing. I called the security company. A bored dispatcher told me it was likely an animal, pigeons or raccoons in the roof space. Acoustics in old buildings were notoriously deceptive. She offered to send a patrol. It would be 40 minutes. I said I'd call back if I heard it again. I worked the rest of the shift with the desk lamp turned up as high as it would go and the corridor door unlocked. I didn't tell myself it was nothing that night. That's how I know it was the beginning. The second time, it was worse. Night 7. I was working later in the shift. It was past 2 in the morning, processing a section of files from the late 1950s when I found the first anomaly. In archival work, anomalies are common. Misfiled documents, items cataloged under wrong dates, foreign materials slipped between pages. You note them, you correct them, you move on. But what I found in the 1958 section of patient files was not a misfiling. It was a folder that didn't belong to the archive at all. The paper was wrong, not aged, not brittle, not foxed with the brown spots of oxidation that covered everything else from that era. It was clean white paper, the kind you'd find in any office supply store today. And it was sitting in the middle of a stack of documents that had, according to the Foundation's intake inventory, not been touched since the building closed in 1987. I opened the folder with gloved hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, not printed, typed. On what looked like a manual typewriter, the letters slightly uneven, the ink dark and fresh. It read, Room 14, West Wing, 3rd floor. She has been waiting a very long time. No signature, no date, no other context. I photographed it. I turned it over, blank on the reverse. I examined the folder it had been placed in, a genuine 1958 patient record. A woman admitted for what the paperwork euphemistically called involuntary melancholia. Her name was listed as E. Voss, the same name as the hospital. I called the Foundation contact number. It went to voicemail. It was past midnight. I left a message describing what I'd found and asking whether anyone else had been in the archive recently. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I lay in my rented room in town and stared at the ceiling and thought about the footsteps on the marble floor and the smell of roses in a sealed basement and a piece of paper that should not exist. The foundation called me back at 11 that morning. They were apologetic, confused, insistent that no one else had access to the building. They asked if I wanted to pause the contract. I said no. The money was too good, and I'd spent my whole adult life being sensible. The third time, I stopped being sensible. Night 11. I'd been on edge for days, working faster, keeping the volume on my laptop turned up to fill the silence. I'd developed small rituals, checking both connecting doors at the start of each shift, setting a book flat on the bottom step of the basement stairs so I'd see if it had been disturbed, keeping my phone fully charged even though there was no signal, because the flashlight still worked. The book on the stairs had not moved. Not on night 8, 9, 10. I began to relax, fractionally. On night 11, I arrived at 9 as usual, went through my routine, got to work. Around midnight, I needed more archival boxes from the second of the 3 connecting rooms. They were stacked along the far wall in there, behind the secondary shelving units. I unlocked the connecting door, propped it open with a box, went in with my lamp. The room smelled of roses. Not faintly, not briefly. The smell was saturating, thick, warm, entirely wrong in that cold stone room. I stopped in the doorway and my hand tightened on the lamp. The shelving units cast long shadows. Behind them, the far wall was dark. I raised the lamp higher. There was a woman standing at the far end of the room. I need to be precise about what I saw, because I've turned it over in my mind thousands of times since. She was standing against the far wall, partially behind the last shelving unit, facing me. She appeared to be wearing a hospital gown, pale, institutional. Her hair was loose and dark, hanging forward over her face. She was entirely still. I said hello. She didn't move. I took one step into the room. The smell of roses intensified. My lamp illuminated the space fully. It was a powerful lamp. It reached the far wall without question. There was no one there. I stood in the doorway for a very long time. Then I went back to my work table, sat down, and experienced what I can only describe as a controlled collapse. My body continuing to breathe and function while my mind went somewhere quiet and blank and refused to process what I had just seen. I considered leaving. I genuinely sat there and calculated the cost of breaking the contract. Then I looked at the stack of files in front of me and thought about my bank account and thought, you're tired. It's nearly 1 in the morning. Old buildings play tricks, and I stayed. That was a mistake, but I think I was already in it by then. I think the building had already decided something about me. I went to the local library on my day off, my nights off, technically, and looked up the history of Voss Memorial. There was more than I expected. The hospital had been founded by a Dr. Henrik Voss in 1921. His daughter, Eleanor Voss, had been one of its first patients, admitted in 1922 at the age of 19, listed in the original intake records as suffering from acute delusional psychosis. According to a heritage document I found in the library's local history section, Eleanor had died at Voss Memorial in 1961, never having been discharged. She had lived in the hospital for 39 years. The heritage document noted, almost as an aside, that Eleanor had been a notable patient, that the staff had kept informal records of her case that went well beyond the standard clinical notes, that she had reportedly exhibited what the document called unusual behaviors throughout her residency, that she had, until her death, insisted she was not ill, that she had been kept in a room on the 3rd floor of the West Wing. Room 14, night 15. I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking. Why did you stay? Why did you go to the West Wing? Why didn't you just leave? And I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this. I am an archivist. I am a person who believes that answers exist in documents, in records, in the physical traces that the past leaves behind. And I had spent 2 weeks inside a story that didn't have an ending yet. I went up to the West Wing on night 15. I told myself I was doing due diligence. I told myself the foundation should know the condition of the upper floors before the renovation. I told myself a lot of things as I unlocked the internal staircase door and started up. The West Wing corridor on the third floor ran roughly 80 feet from the staircase to the end of the building. Patient rooms on both sides, heavy wooden doors, small wire-reinforced windows set into each one at head height. The floor was linoleum, cracked and lifting. The walls were that particular institutional green that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. My footsteps were very loud. I counted the doors. Room 14 was on the left, 7 doors down from the staircase. The door was open, not ajar. Open, pushed fully back against the wall, as if someone had been expecting me. I stood in the doorway with my lamp. The room was small. A single iron bed frame, no mattress. A small window, the glass long since broken, the frame covered in plastic sheeting that breathed in and out with the November wind. A wooden chair in the corner, facing the window. And on the bed frame, arranged with a precision that was unmistakably deliberate, a collection of objects, pressed dried flowers, roses, brown and papery with age, laid in a row along the length of the frame. Between them, folded pieces of paper, dozens of them, all the same clean white, all clearly recent. My hands were shaking when I picked up the first one. It was typed, same as the one in the archive. It read, "She told them she wasn't ill." They didn't listen. "Do you listen, Daniel?" My name, on a piece of paper, in a locked building, in a room that had been sealed for 30 years. I dropped the paper. I took a step back, and that's when I heard it, behind me, in the corridor, the sound of a door slowly swinging closed. Then another, one by one, the patient room doors, swinging shut in sequence, moving down the corridor toward me. There was no draft. The corridor windows were intact. I had checked this on my way up without knowing why. I ran. There is no more dignified word for it. I ran for the staircase, and as I ran I could hear the doors behind me, still closing in sequence, and underneath that sound, or maybe it was inside my head, I genuinely cannot be certain, a woman's voice, very close, very quiet. They never listen. I hit the staircase door so hard I bruised my shoulder. Down 2 flights, through the reception hall, out the front door into the November dark and the cold and the sound of the wind. I stood in the car park for a long time before I could make my hands work well enough to get my keys out. I drove to the nearest 24-hour petrol station and sat in the car park under the lights until it got light. I emailed the foundation that morning to terminate my contract. I cited a family emergency. I didn't know how to explain what had actually happened, and I'm not sure I wanted to. They were understanding. They offered to pay out a portion of the remaining contract. I thanked them and didn't cash the check for 2 months because doing so felt like acknowledging that it had been real. I sent an email to the Heritage Foundation separately, explaining what I'd found in room 14, the papers, the pressed roses. I included my photographs. I asked them to have the room examined. They responded 3 weeks later. They said that when their consultant accessed the West Wing, room 14 had been empty. No objects on the bed frame. No papers. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just an empty room with a broken window. My photographs still exist. I have looked at them many times. They show exactly what I described. The foundation proceeded with the renovation. The building is now a hotel. It has a 4-star rating. Reviewers describe it as charming, atmospheric, full of character. The West Wing rooms have been refurbished. Room 14 is now a junior suite with a king bed and an en-suite bathroom, and reviews that describe it as cozy and surprisingly peaceful. One reviewer, posted 8 months after the hotel opened, left a single line. Kept smelling flowers in the night. Couldn't place it. Beautiful room though. I've tried to construct rational explanations for everything that happened. Someone had access to the building and was staging an elaborate hoax. Possible. But the level of research required, the knowledge of my name, the logistics of disappearing without trace in a locked building, strain credibility. I was sleep-deprived and my mind was manufacturing experiences. Possible, but my photographs are not manufactured. Or Eleanor Voss spent 39 years in a room being told she was ill when she wasn't, and when she died she stayed. And sometimes when the building is quiet enough, she wants someone to understand that. That's the one I come back to. Not because I believe in ghosts. I'm still not sure I do, but because it's the only explanation that gives her some dignity, some agency. She had been waiting a very long time. Maybe she just wanted someone to finally listen. I still work in archival research. I still prefer systems, order, the comfort of everything in its place. But I don't take jobs in empty buildings anymore, and I don't dismiss smells I can't explain. And when I walk into a new space now, I pause at the threshold for just a moment before I go in, just to check, just to see if anything is already there. To this day, I cannot smell roses without my chest tightening. That cold, specific tightening that isn't quite fear, but is the body remembering something the mind has tried to set down. I don't think it worked. I think she's still there, in that room on the 3rd floor, in the quiet hours when the hotel guests are asleep. I think she's still waiting for someone who will finally believe her.